Let's try this again, because my phone was being a pain. Anyway, start off with Happy Memorial Day. Sorry about the horrible timing with my chapter, because this is the chapter with the death by serial killer. And I literally just read all of it, but my phone decided to be a little a nuisance and not finish the chapter, so we're trying again. Anyway, Chapter 10 of Reaper Adventures, The Search. Happy Memorial Day, chapter with serial killer death. And also in advance, it is not kid-friendly because of the simple fact there is not only the serial killer death, there is death by demon. I say death by demon, but it's actually a murder by a demon. And this is the chapter with the murder by the serial killer. There's the mention of self-harm. There's a scene of aftermath slasher movie violence, a scene of abuse which has been passed, and a scene of torture. So if you want to continue, do so at your own risk. Let's see if I can do this quickly before my phone decides to be a nuisance again. So going on chapter 2, I apologize in advance for the different cup because I'm visiting my sister. And there's no music playing in the background either, because, yeah. Let's continue and try again. And this is a long chapter, just so everyone's aware. I think, yep, there. Yeah, this is a long chapter, so. Just forewarning. Chapter 10. It was a month without any incidents that were horrific beyond reasoning. Cerberus knew the demon was still in the shadows, though, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Unfortunately, the demon was forced to take the back burner for now. Young adults and teenagers from the neighboring town of Corysville were showing up dead from apparent suicide. Many of the college kids from Corysville College didn't show up, though. Cerberus wasn't convinced it was suicide with that many potential missing bodies. That and many of the souls of the apparent suicides still had their death wounds. That meant they had been betrayed by someone they had trusted so deeply that the betrayal had scarred their souls. Cerberus had politely told Bart and Ao to investigate Corysville College for the possibility of a serial killer. And not the spoon, you know, how you kill cereal with a spoon. You know, we're talking about stabby, stabby, rip, stab serial killer, not nom nom. Anyway, I'm trying to make light. TikTok notification, anyway. Possibility of a serial killer. Bart and Ao had agreed to do this and had decided to investigate in turns. Ao during the day and school hours after she was done with work, while Bart would do this at night after school hours. Most of the time, because of Ao's work schedule, as well as Bart's work schedule, both of them would be at Corysville College after school hours. That informed Cerberus that Detective Serena Lunar and Detective John Alibi were now investigating as well. Bart and Ao had also told Cerberus about a Reaper who had not yet been born into the existence of a Reaper. However, this Reaper was the target of exactly what Cerberus thought was around: a serial killer. What concerned and confused Cerberus more than the serial killer was what Ao called the creepy volunteer. From what Ao had described, the creepy volunteer was a Deoan, a monster that devoured the essence of any individual's soul, human or otherwise, and could then shift into that being. No illusions were required to disguise themselves when they had whatever being's essence to shift into. No one would know when a Deoan was hunting them, not until it was too late. But according to Ao and Bart, the creepy volunteer wasn't the serial killer. In fact, the creepy volunteer was being as helpful as he allowed himself to be. Cerberus hoped Bart and Ao would be all right at Corysville College tonight. If Cerberus wasn't at work, he would check on them. Cerberus sighed and continued to fill out the toe tags, hoping that nothing would go wrong. Bart was silent as he watched as some late-night college kids wandered around the campus grounds, heading towards the fountain directly at the center of the campus grounds. These ones were the party-goers, the ones not concerned about their grades. These ones were only going to college for the social life, because we all have different cliques of college kids, the social ones. Anyway, it's a lot like high school, just a lot more advanced. Their faces were familiar, but Bart never paid attention to any of their names. There were no new faces among them, and Bart turned his attention elsewhere. He was glad both Ao and himself were invisible to the normal human eye. Ao appeared beside Bart, glanced at the partygoers, and then noticed one of the curtains close. It was a window from the teacher's dorm. Bart had noticed it too. None of them paid it any mind. Some teachers liked to close their curtains after all. Bart glanced at the teacher's dorm and noticed that the same curtain shifted slightly for the teacher to make sure no one was watching them. Bart mentioned this to Ao, and both of them decided to investigate. They teleported to the now suspicious room and saw the Reaper who hadn't been born into the existence with a professor who taught criminal psychology. "You didn't tell on me, did you, Damon?" the professor asked as he checked the door to his room, locking it. Damon, the student, glanced at the professor when he heard the door lock. "No," Damon answered as terror began to make his heart beat wildly. The dawning realization that this time he might not be able to talk his way out of being killed began to sink in. "Ah, so you're beginning to understand your predicament," the professor said. Bart and Ao suddenly realized that the criminal psychology professor was the serial killer. I mean, really, that's kind of terrifying. Yeah. And there was nothing they could do to help Damon get free. All they could do was hope Damon could talk his way to some type of salvation. Damon was silent, hoping it could quiet his heart and slow his breathing so he could somehow live through the night. His professor studied him and then walked over to Damon. Damon silently prayed to whatever higher power could possibly be out there that he would live, that his family would be able to see him again, or to be all right if he didn't live through the night. Damon watched as the professor seemed to come to a decision and felt his stomach sink as his teacher grabbed the old camera. Oh my goodness. Facebook notification. As his teacher grabbed the old camera that had been on his desk. Damon knew that he wasn't going to live through the night, and his wrists twinged with the memories of his professor's scalpel sliding across the sensitive skin. The tally-mark scars had been expertly made to make it appear as if Damon had cut himself multiple times. Damon's professor turned on some music and turned it up so if Damon fought, no one would know. Damon knew his only option in order to live was to somehow escape. The lighting's kind of cool on this. Damon glanced at the locked door and then jumped when he heard the camera click. That was perfect. "I would show you, but you're about to kill yourself," Damon's professor said as the Polaroid picture was removed from the camera. Damon felt desperation begin to settle in his veins. His professor put his picture down along with the camera and picked up the scalpel that Damon hadn't seen until now. Damon backed up a few steps when his professor turned to him. The desperation that had formed the lump in Damon's throat and had rooted him to the spot morphed into terror. Instead of making Damon freeze, the terror gave Damon the fuel to move Damon's body. Damon ran, throwing the chair in front of his teacher's path, knowing the loud bang was unheard as he raced to the door. Damon felt his hand wrap around the doorknob just as the scalpel sank into his left kidney at an angle for it to be believable that Damon had inflicted the wound on himself. The professor had covered Damon's mouth before Damon's cry of pain, confusion, and defeat could be heard. The professor forcibly moved Damon away from the door and dragged his still struggling Damon to the toppled chair. The professor threw Damon on the floor, making sure Damon's wound would hit one of the corners of the chair. The scalpel would be removed at this point in time, so yeah, that's something I have to add. These are rough drafts. Damon's back arched as a silent, airy scream escaped from him. He felt cold sweat begin to break out over his skin, and the unwanted weakness of what Damon knew was the beginning of shock. Shock, it actually tends to do that. Mango monster. Damon fought the shock and rapidly fading eyesight that he knew would drag him into oblivion. He struggled to stand and felt his professor grab his wrists. Damon acted on pure instinct to survive. He forced himself forward and felt himself fall and land on his professor, winding his professor. Damon clawed himself off from the floor and once again forced himself to stand. He swayed with a horrible weakness, ignored the cold spreading through his body, and practically dragged his resisting feet towards the door. Damon heard his professor get up and forced himself to move faster than the crawling pace he was moving at now. It had the desired effect, but it had a horrible, decisive consequence. Damon felt himself fall to his hands and knees after a few quicker-paced shuffles. His arms were unable to hold his weight for too long, and Damon fell on his side with a wound which he knew was fatal now. Clarification, I need to enunciate my words. Damon saw the world that had been turning grey was now beginning to fade from sight. It was blurred already around the edges, and now the entire room was blurred and grey, rapidly descending to black. Damon felt his professor pick him up and drag his barely struggling body away from the door, which he had almost reached again. So close. Damon felt the cold metal against his wrist, and then some white spots danced along the room, bringing some horrible clarity with them. Damon wasn't going to live for much longer. There were more white dots and something Damon guessed was supposed to be pain, as his other wrist was sliced open. The professor watched as some awareness bloomed in Damon's blue eyes. Damon's natural blue-black hair clung to his light tan skin. The cold sweat was almost gone now, and Damon was nearly dead. 'Cause that sucks. I actually realized that that's a kind of really crappy part of the... Really, really bad part of this whole thing. Anyway, the professor waited until Damon's valiant attempts to remain conscious began to falter, and Damon slipped in and out of awareness. Damon's professor checked the picture he had taken, wrote Damon's name down, the date, and a note. It was the professor's 30-year anniversary, and he had now only encountered 3 people who fought to remain alive and who didn't fully trust him. It was such a thrill for the professor to watch the defeat spread through them when they acknowledged that they were going to die and have no help arrive, because serial killers are just, a little demented. Just a little bit, but they're very intelligent, so it's kind of scary. Damon's professor walked over to Damon, who was conscious again, struggling to remain alive. The realization that Damon wasn't going to get help and that he was going to die had begun to bloom in those nearly lifeless, beautiful blue eyes. The professor smiled and continued to watch as Damon still struggled to stay alive. The death rattle was now there with every inhalation Damon took, and the professor watched when Damon knew that fighting the inevitable was pointless. One final tear slithered slowly down Damon's face before Damon unwillingly let one long last exhale. Oh, there's a cat next to me. I'm sorry. I saw something move. Unwillingly let one long last exhale escape from him. There was only one brief second of complete darkness, and then the room was brought back into sudden, vivid clarity. Damon saw his body, his professor, and the wounds that even an expert would believe Damon had inflicted on himself. He was stunned and looked up from his body eventually to see the 2 individuals he knew his professor hadn't seen. The red-headed female was silent and then suddenly vanished into thin air. "Ayo!" the 19-year-old male exclaimed when she vanished. The 19-year-old studied Damon for a brief second, and then he vanished as well. "Wait!" Damon called, even though he knew it was pointless. They were both gone. Damon blinked and then heard, as well as felt, the explosion. He looked out the window as his professor pulled the curtains back to investigate. To anyone else, the windows of the information building had shattered for no reason. Bum, bum, bum. Damon saw the red-headed female along with the 19-year-old male. The red-headed female was running, windows exploding in her wake as the 19-year-old male, picked himself off of the ground. Before Damon knew it, he had appeared beside the 19-year-old, feeling like he had just been through a vacuum and spat out with a few added inches. Okay. The 19-year-old looked at Damon and watched as Damon staggered towards the path of destruction. "What are you doing?" Bart asked as he stood up. I might have to change that little thing. Bart pulled the shard of glass from his stomach and watched as the spiritual energy rapidly healed what would have been a fatal wound if he were alive, and watched Damon finally realize that he hadn't grown a few extra inches. "Helping?" Damon replied as he looked at Bart. "How?" Bart questioned with a raised eyebrow. "I know the campus grounds and the surrounding woods. I know a shortcut or two, maybe 3, so we can intercept her and you can calm her down." Damon answered. "Okay, we're actually almost done with this." Bart studied Damon and then nodded to let Damon know that Damon was to lead the way. Damon blinked and then ran down to where the path of destruction reached the woods. Bart followed Damon and reluctantly admitted that having help was a good thing right now. Yes, okay. They reached a clearing just as Ao did, and Bart took a few cautious steps forward. The whirlwind of glass, stone, and small broken branches grew stronger, and the trees in the clearing began to get ripped apart. Damon took a few steps after Bart, who had disappeared in the whirlwind. The whirlwind changed direction, and Damon saw Bart with a large section of a tree branch lodged in his chest as the multitude of glass, sharp stones, and branches reared above Ao's head. Tidal wave of destruction, of angriness, and everything. Yeah. Damon took a step forward and instantly regretted it, as a wave of destruction raced towards him. Damon barely avoided what would have hit him and watched as the whirlwind picked up its pace again. "Bao, make sure he doesn't try and go after me," an unfamiliar male voice ordered an unseen female. Damon looked behind him to see a 25-year-old male with long white hair, unseen eyes, and pale skin. Next to him was a Chinese woman who Damon assumed was Bao Yao. Bao Yao nodded and grabbed Damon's wrist as the 25-year-old male entered the whirlwind of destruction. The whirlwind of destruction. Damon looked at Bao Yao with confusion and attempted to free himself. After Damon was sure that more chaos would follow, the whirlwind stopped and every piece of glass, stone, and shredded wood fell to the ground. The white-haired man was unharmed, and after some uncontrolled sobbing from the redhead and consoling from the white-haired man, they both stood up, the white-haired man, and picking up the 19-year-old male. Okay, yeah, these are rough drafts, so forgive me if I kind of stutter a little bit, but there are some words I have to add in these sentences. The branch had been removed from their chest, and wisps of blue were emerging from the wound. The white-haired man, Chinese woman, red-headed female, and injured 19-year-old male, who Damon was sure was dead, vanished into thin air, leaving Damon completely confused. Damon knew his body would be eventually found, or he hoped his body would eventually be found. He knew it would be deemed as a suicide. Damon turned around and saw a 13-year-old female with a large 30-year-old male who looked like a Viking. Viking man. Damon froze, half expecting them to vanish. "Damon, would it be all right if you came with us? You are going to need to learn about what you are after all. By the way, I'm on a spinning chair. Spinning chairs are the best." That was me saying that, not that. Anyway, "You are going to need to learn about what you are after all," the 13-year-old told Damon. Damon studied her, cast wary glance at her guardian. "Please," the 13-year-old said, holding out her hand. Damon hesitantly took her hand and was instantly in what he assumed was her home. "Make yourself comfortable. You are going to have a busy day tomorrow," Mescanet said. Damon watched as the 13-year-old girl answered questions about school tomorrow and realized that her guardian was going to teach him what he was. Whatever he was now. Mescanet went to her room and Loki watched as Damon attempted to settle him. Loki knew he had a long task ahead of him. And we're done. We're done with chapter 10. Next week is chapter 11, and as I said, I did apologize in advance for the horrible timing of my chapter 10, but that was a long chapter. Jeez. Anyway, being quick because my phone's being a little nuisance. I have some accounts. I have a Wattpad account, which is at Tempesta771. A TikTok account, which is at Airdrin Craven 2, no uppercases, no spaces, under the name Tempesta Braveheart, which is my YouTube channel. An Instagram account, which is Tempesta Braveheart, no uppercases, no spaces, under Airdrin Craven. A Snapchat account, which is Airdrin Craven, no uppercases, no spaces, and we are watching my YouTube, and we're done with chapter 10, so chapter 11 is next week, and I will not be in the galaxy far, far away, and we will have music playing on the background, but I love Mango Monster, because Mango Monster, Anyway, this is where I say, peace out, Girl Scouts, and enjoy the mental hilarity.